Pyongyang's power was drowning in blood. After the Ninth Party Congress, Kim Jong-un began cutting down the old guard men who had held the system together for decades. He called it generational change. The rest of the world called it a purge. No one drew more attention than Choe Ryong-hae, the second most powerful man in North Korea. Once the polished face of the regime, he began to unravel in public. Hollow eyes, trembling hands. International analysts whispered he's finished. But inside the party headquarters in Pyongyang, the real machinery of death was already running quiet, efficient, and merciless. Yesterday's loyalists vanished overnight, and at the center of that storm stood his personal secretary, Choi Min-ho. This is what he saw. An unrecorded top secret of Pyongyang. The testimony that breaks that taboo begins now. So that this truth is not buried in the darkness. Please support us by subscribing and liking this video. Pyongyang before dawn cuts like a blade. My footsteps echoed through the empty corridor of the Central Committee Secretariat, each step a hollow knock against the silence. On the surface, the city was still celebrating the party congress. But inside those walls, it was a slaughterhouse. One by one, the old partisan veterans who had built this system were disappearing. I was Choe Ryong-hae's personal secretary. And I was standing at the eye of the storm. When I opened the door to his office, I froze. The man behind the desk was not the figure I knew. The gaunt face I'd seen on state television that wasn't an image anymore. It was right in front of me. He stared at nothing, then slowly turned his head at the sound of my entrance. His eyes were sunken, broken. Where there had once been authority, there was only the look of an animal waiting to be slaughtered. "Secretary Cho, you're here." His voice came out cracked, like dried earth. When I reached to set the documents on his desk, he grabbed my wrist. Hard. His fingers were skeletal, nothing but bone and knuckle, and they were shaking. He leaned in close and dropped his voice to nearly nothing. "Min-ho, the harvest failed this year. Rice will be scarce. Empty the storehouse. Start making plans to leave." His eyes were wet when he pulled away. It wasn't a weather report. It was a warning. A final act of mercy from a man who already knew he was gone. When I returned to my desk, the situation had already reached the point of no return. A state security agent sat in my chair leafing through my files with casual arrogance. When I approached, he looked up with a thin smile and stared at my ID. His long metal ring tapped the desk. Tap, tap, tap. Each strike landed like a countdown. He yanked open my desk drawer without a word. The sharp tear of paper cutting through the silence made my nerves feel like they might snap. "Secretary Cho," he said, his voice sliding like something cold across skin. "What exactly were you and the chairman whispering about?" "Worried about the harvest?" I forced a smile. "Routine reports," I said. But my heart was hammering so hard I could barely breathe. The ring kept tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Every sound pushed the air a little further out of the room. From across the corridor, a commotion. Then a voice, raw, desperate, "I am not a traitor." "General." It cut off under heavy boots. I looked at the bulletin board. A list. 2 names were crossed out in red. One was a department chief I had worked alongside for 20 years. The other had shared a cigarette with me the day before. That list wasn't paperwork. It was an obituary. That night, I went home and made a decision. The warning Choe Ryong-hae had given me was the last kindness he had left to offer. By morning, someone else would be sitting at my desk, erasing every trace of me. The blade I had once wielded was now aimed at my family's throats. Power doesn't end in glory. It ends at the edge of a cliff. I started packing, but just as we were ready to move, the footsteps stopped outside our door. A pause. Then the sound of a master key entering the lock. The click of that key split the silence like a gunshot. The door swung open and the smell of cigarette smoke came first. Then the agent stepped inside, and his eyes swept across my wife and our 8-year-old son. That same metal ring caught the light. I pulled up every ounce of authority I still had. "What do you think you're doing?" I grabbed his wrist and looked him dead in the eye. "I'm leaving on a special inspection ordered by Chairman Cho." "Are you really going to block the chairman's secretary? How many heads do you think you have?" His eyes wavered. The last drops of my rank bought us maybe 10 seconds. The moment his hand moved toward his radio, I grabbed my family and threw us toward the back stairwell. My son let out a sharp cry. My wife's shoe flew off on the 3rd step. She didn't stop. Barefoot on cold cement, feet leaving blood with every stride, she ran. The sound of it, raw and desperate, rang through the empty stairwell like something breaking. We made it to the basement and into a storage room behind a pile of scrap metal. I pulled out the document I'd risked everything to take. I angled the flashlight low and found my name. Choi Min-ho. Next to it, a single red mark. Not ink, something darker. My father's voice came back to me the day he pinned a medal to my chest. Min-ho, this red star is the heart of the Republic. The glory of our family. But staring at that mark, I understood something he never could have. The red star was never protecting us. It was aimed at us. 20 years of loyalty, erased by a single dot. The system doesn't protect its own. It consumes them once they've served their purpose. We moved through Pyongyang's back alleys like rodents. The neighborhood surveillance network, 5 household monitoring groups, was everywhere. The torch monument of the Juche Tower, which I had once looked up to with pride, now looked like the eye of a surveillance camera hunting us through the dark. The searchlights on Monsu Hill weren't protecting citizens. They were tracking us. Then a siren in the distance. A searchlight swept into the mouth of our alley. 2 shots cracked the air. The pursuit team was close. The white beam reached for our backs. I pulled my wife and son into the dark and ran. The junkyard contact was waiting with a battered cargo truck, just as arranged. The man who had bowed to me for years now stared with flat eyes and an open palm. Money first. All of Pyongyang is upside down. This is my life on the line. I handed him my wife's gold and a roll of dollars. He counted it, then jerked his head toward the truck bed. Piled high with rotting cabbage. Get in. They're already on your scent. I pushed my family into the stench and climbed in after them. As we cleared a Pyongyang checkpoint, a black sedan appeared behind us, closing fast. I recognized him, the agent with the metal ring. The old truck screamed and the sedan's exhaust sliced through the night air. I ordered the driver onto a military back road through the mountains. The truck lurched along the cliff's edge. My wife held our son without making a sound. The searchlight swept over the tarp and then the truck disappeared into the forest. We'd lost them, but only barely. He would know I knew that road. 10 hours later, the truck stopped in a barren field near the northern border. The door opened and a blade of Arctic wind hit our faces. Pyongyang's neon was gone. In its place, the dark silhouette of the Yalu River, coiling like a black snake in the distance. The faint lights on the Chinese side looked close enough to touch. But the frozen river between us could just as easily become our unmarked grave. I took my wife's cold hand. We stepped forward. The moment my foot hit the ice, it groaned. That sound, like a crack spreading outward, felt like a signal flare, announcing us to every guard within a mile. My wife's feet had been bare since Pyongyang. By now they were raw and bleeding, each step peeling skin off against the ice. Her face was white, but she had her hand over our son's mouth, and she made no sound. We reached the midpoint, the deepest stretch, where the current ran hardest. A column of light smashed down from behind. Stop, who's there? A shot screamed past my head. My wife's foot broke through a thin patch and plunged into the water. She lurched sideways, half gone. I grabbed her, hauled her back up. The searchlight locked on us. Bullets chipped the ice around our feet. The water that poured into my boots turned to lead. Frozen denim clamped around my legs like a vice. I threw her over my back and ran. We clawed up the Chinese bank and collapsed into the mud. I lay there, lungs burning, tasting something copper. When I finally turned back, the Yalu stretched out behind us, enormous and indifferent. Searchlights swept the ice from the North Korean side. Dozens of them, still hunting. But the mud under my hands was not North Korean soil. The relief lasted less than a minute. The Chinese broker said nothing. He shoved us into a refrigerated cargo truck, pitch dark, reeking of raw fish, and slammed the iron door. Sub-zero air turned our wet clothes to ice. I stuffed my coat sleeve into my son's mouth to muffle any sound. The dark was worse than the cold. We drove south for what felt like forever. At every highway checkpoint, red light bled through the cracks in the door. China's facial recognition cameras, the broker had bragged, can catch a ghost. Those red flickers looked exactly like the agent's eyes back in Pyongyang. I pressed myself smaller into the dark. Then, somewhere near Kunming, the truck lurched to a dead stop. Boots outside, heavy, confident, then pounding on the iron door. Bang, bang, bang. Public security. My heart stopped. My wife's eyes went wide. A flashlight beam swept under the door and touched our feet. My hand went to the blade I'd kept in my coat. Getting caught here meant one thing: back to the Yalu. Back to the execution grounds. The Laotian jungle swallowed us whole. My wife's feet, wrapped in torn rags, by now left a faint trail of blood on every surface. The feet that had only ever walked Pyongyang's polished corridors were now as hardened as leather, swollen, riddled with insect bites. We crawled through mud to avoid a Laotian patrol's whistle cutting through the trees. Caught here means deportation. Deportation means death. Then, through the mist, the Mekong appeared. The broker's boat was a wreck, patched holes, rotting wood. We climbed in and river water immediately rose to our ankles. My wife sat like stone, holding our son to her chest. We pushed out into the current. The engine coughed, sputtered, died. Silence. Nothing but the river lapping at the hull. We couldn't see the bank in either direction. No North Korean gun had ever scared me the way that silence did. We held each other and listened to our own heartbeats. I pulled the starter cord until my arm gave out. The engine caught. Through the fog, across the water, light appeared, a Thai police station. I had never seen anything more beautiful in my life. We beached the boat and I dropped to my knees in the mud. My wife buried her face against my shoulder and said the only thing she had left to say. We made it. Her voice, trembling and small, dissolved into the river mist, carrying with it everything we had left behind. The air drifting through the bars of the Thai detention center was warmer than the marble floors of the Pyongyang headquarters. The first bowl of Thai rice they handed me was steaming. I looked down at my wife's feet. The rags were gone. White bandages, clean and dry. No more bleeding. In the corner of the cafeteria, an old television murmured. North Korean state TV. A broadcaster's sharp voice cut through the static, anti-party, counter-revolutionary elements. Removed from all positions. On screen, Choe Ryong-hae was being led away. He looked worse than the last time I'd seen him. The man who told me to empty the storehouse and run had saved my life. And in doing so, walked into the fire himself. That debt settled on my chest like a stone. A South Korean consular officer touched my shoulder. Mr. Choi Min-ho, it's time. We're going to Korea. Something broke open. I couldn't stop it. On the boarding ramp, I looked up. Not a searchlight. Not a surveillance beam hunting for my outline. Just the sun falling on everyone equally, asking nothing in return. I was no longer someone's secretary. I was just a man with a name. Walking into the light. Seoul at night is 1,000 times brighter than Pyongyang. But even here, I don't sleep well. I lie in the dark and hear things: boots in a corridor, a metal ring tapping a desk. The secretary who moved through the nerve center of North Korean power. That man no longer exists. The title, the authority, the fear I once commanded gone. Now I'm nobody in particular. A man loading trucks before dawn for a delivery service. The drop-in station stings sometimes, like stepping off a ledge. But poverty without fear is better than comfort under surveillance. I remind myself of that every morning. The news from across the border stays grim. After we escaped, a wave of purges swept through the secretariat. The department chief who used to share cigarettes with me was dragged to a detention facility. The broker who drove us north, the one who had bowed to me for years, was reportedly executed after being turned in. And at the bottom of a news ticker, Choe Ryong-hae disappears from public life. The old operator who told me to run had been consumed by the very system he spent his life holding together. Everything I have now, this ordinary, unglamorous freedom, rests on his silence. And on the deaths of people who never made it. I look out at Seoul's neon. People walk past it without a second thought. But I crossed more than the Yalu and the Mekong. I crossed out of a world ruled by fear and into one where human dignity is allowed to exist. I crossed a line most people will never see, let alone survive. I'm not a name on a list anymore. I'm just a father walking his son to school. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel even a fraction of what freedom is worth, please remember the ones still trapped in the dark. The ones who haven't made it out yet. Your support keeps stories like this alive. And sometimes, that's what breaks walls. Thank you for